Steelers Nation, let me tell you something straight off the top. Following this team is never boring, and following the journey of a player like TJ, what adds a whole different layer to the ride. Every season brings its twists, its bumps, and its moments that make you stop and wonder what exactly is going on out there. And yeah, a lot of people have been looking at this current stretch and asking the same thing. What's up with number 90? Did he suddenly fall off? Is the magic gone? But before we jump into any wild conclusions, it is worth taking a breath and looking at what is actually happening on the field. Because here is the deal. Anyone who has been watching TJ for years knows his standard is sky high. His bar is set at a level that only a handful of defenders in the entire league can even dream of touching. So when he is not ripping through offensive lines every other snap or stacking sack totals that make the rest of the pass rushers look like they're standing still, people start panicking. But comparing him to his own peak seasons is like comparing a championship run to a rebuild year. You have to look at the full picture, not just the highlight reel. Now, sure, this season has not been the type of season where every week you look at the stat sheet and see numbers that explode off the page. But if you actually line up what he has done this year against what he put up last year, the difference is not nearly as dramatic as people think. When someone who plays every snap like the stadium lights depend on it has a stretch where things look a little different, it creates this illusion that something is wrong. The truth is far less dramatic. He is putting up production that lines up almost identically with what he did a year ago, even though the defensive unit as a whole is not exactly helping his cause. And that part matters. When the secondary is getting sliced up, or when the inside of the defense is springing leaks left and right, it changes the way a pass rusher's work gets perceived. If a quarterback gets rid of the ball in 2 seconds because someone is wide open down the seam, even the best edge rusher in the world cannot make an impact on that snap. And on television, it looks like he is late. It looks like he is not making the plays he used to make. But it is not because he suddenly forgot how to rush the passer. It is because the chain reaction around him is different. You can see it in moments where plays break down. You can see it in games where the defense collapses in the middle of the field and the responsibility shifts away from the guys on the edge. That shifts the narrative, and fans pick up that narrative and run with it. Suddenly the idea becomes that TJ is slowing down or someone younger is starting to catch up to him. And look, Nick Herbig is having one heck of a year. The kid flies around. He brings energy. He brings burst. But measuring those splash plays against the totality of what TJ does is like comparing a spark to a wildfire. They both have light, but one burns in a completely different way. And every once in a while, you get a reminder of exactly who number 90 is. That play in Chicago was that kind of reminder. That was vintage TJ. What? The version that does not just chase down a quarterback, but shuts the play down from the moment he arrives. The kind of hit where the quarterback cannot step, cannot throw, cannot even breathe before the ball is stripped, and suddenly someone else is scooping it into the end zone. Plays like that are why he has the reputation he does. Plays like that are why the rest of the league studies him. Plays like that are why people who know the game do not even entertain the idea that he is declining. The perception that he is having some significantly worse season is built on surface-level stuff. It is built on the frustration of watching the team struggle as a whole, not on what he is doing snap to snap. You watch him closely and you see the same motor, the same instincts, the same explosiveness. You see a guy who is still fighting through double teams, still forcing offenses to change their protections, still creating chaos that does not always show up in a box score. That is who he is. That is who he has always been. And for anyone who wants to drag the contract into this, here is the truth. When a franchise commits to a player who built his career on reliability, relentlessness, and production, that is not some reckless choice. That is a team saying, we value the guys who make us who we are. A contract is not where his drive comes from. It is not what defines his ceiling. And it definitely is not the reason the team has or has not made other moves. When a team wants to add help, they find a way. There has been room. There has been opportunity. Signing TJ never stopped anything else from happening. And honestly, the part of this whole thing that gets overlooked the most is his mindset. You talk to people who know him or listen to how he carries himself after games, and it becomes obvious. His goals are not individual awards. They are not statistical crowns. They're not about checking off personal milestones. He wants something bigger, something that every player in that locker room claims to want, but only a few burn for at the level he does. He wants the big ring. He wants the biggest game. He wants the night where confetti falls and he can finally say he climbed the entire mountain. That is the kind of fuel that does not fade because of a slow stretch or a scheme that is not doing him any favors. That is the kind of drive that keeps a player hungry, even when narratives try to paint a different picture. Some people might look at the wind and try to guess which way it is blowing. They might decide they have seen enough, that this is the beginning of the end. That is their choice. But as for me, I'm nowhere near that cliff. I'm not even close. I have watched this man long enough to know exactly what he is capable of and how quickly he can flip the entire story of a season. And this team is heading into a stretch where they're going to need every ounce of that. Big games, big moments, big chances to change the arc of the season. When those hits come, when those situations get tight and the defense needs someone to rise, number 90 is the first guy you look at. The history speaks for itself. The effort speaks for itself. The impact speaks for itself. And players wired the way he is do not just vanish from the spotlight. They find it again, and they drag the team into it with them. And while we're talking about pressure and expectation, there is another side to this whole conversation that people do not always want to explore. When a team like the Steelers finds itself stuck in that space between competitiveness and inconsistency, everyone looks for the single lever that explains everything. And in seasons like this, that lever always ends up being the head coach. The noise starts growing, people start pointing fingers, and suddenly every issue gets tied back to one person as if the entire organization runs through a single headset. But football is never that simple, and anyone who has been around this sport long enough knows change is not always the magic solution fans imagine it to be. There is this belief floating around that if a coach like Mike Tomlin were to walk away, the locker room would just crumble. That players who speak highly of him would pack their bags or demand trades. But that is not how professional athletes operate. Players adapt. They adjust. They show up ready to work because the game itself demands it. And when a new coach steps into that building, most veterans do not treat that moment with fear or resentment. They treat it with curiosity. A fresh voice, new ideas, new energy, a new way of looking at the same problems that have held them back. Sometimes that spark alone is enough to shift the mindset of an entire roster. You see it all the time in other sports. A coach with a huge resume steps out, a lesser-known name steps in, and suddenly a team that looked flat starts skating or running or playing like they just got rebooted. Not because the old coach was bad or because players secretly want him gone, but because change forces everyone, rookies, stars, veterans, role players, to reset the way they approach each day. A new set of eyes brings different angles. A new system asks different things of the same personnel. And when players feel like someone is using their strengths in ways they had not experienced before, that can ignite a level of excitement that overshadows any lingering attachment to what came before. That is why the fear of a mass exodus never lines up with how locker rooms actually work. Players might love their coach. They might appreciate the culture he built. They might respect the way he handles them as men as much as athletes. But at the end of the day, these are competitors. They want to win. They want to maximize their careers. They want to feel like they're being put in the best possible position to succeed. If a new voice arrives with a plan that makes sense, they get on board. Sometimes even faster than people expect. And honestly, if you look at the Steelers right now, the frustration many players are feeling is not tied to coaching loyalty. It is tied to usage. When an offense goes entire drives without testing the middle of the field, the receivers feel it. When a defense sticks to conservative shells, even when opponents are picking them apart underneath, the linebackers and secondary feel it. When certain decisions limit the full potential of the roster, the veterans feel it. And athletes do not sit quiet when they feel underused. They might not rant publicly, but behind the scenes, they know exactly what parts of a system are holding them back. That is where the entire conversation around leadership and direction gets interesting. Because when players reach that point where they feel the scheme is not maximizing their talent, The desire for change does not come from panic. It comes from a need to evolve. And when that moment arrives, and it does for every franchise eventually, the fear of big disruption is mostly coming from the outside. Fans fear it. Media debates it. But players, more often than not, embrace it like an opportunity to reset the board. And let's connect this back to T.J. for a moment, because his name always gets dragged into the conversation. People hear him speak positively about his coach or his organization and use it as proof that he would walk away if things changed. But that comment came during a contract negotiation at a time when loyalty, gratitude, and pride were all part of the conversation. He was expressing what the team meant to him, not outlining some ultimatum that he would only stay under one specific coach. And the same could be said for guys like Cam Heyward. Veteran leaders praise stability because they have lived through the chaos that exists in other organizations, not because they are incapable of adapting to a transition. If the Steelers ever reach that fork in the road, and that is still an if, not a prediction, the locker room would adjust far easier than people think. Not because they never cared about their current coach, but because athletes are built to focus on the next rep, the next practice, the next system that challenges them to be better. They do not operate based on emotional panic. They operate based on competitive instinct. And what fuels that instinct is something bigger than any single coaching style or philosophy. It is the belief that their skills should shine on the field. When players feel like the system showcases who they are, they do not waste a second worrying about what name is on the office door. They worry about winning games. They worry about maximizing their primes. They worry about performing for teammates who share the same goals. That is really where the Steelers stand right now. This roster is full of talent that knows it could be producing more. You hear it in the tone of their interviews. You see it in the body language on the sideline. You can feel the tension between what the team is capable of and what the results have been. The players are not confused. They know exactly when the plan does not match the identity they believe they have. And that disconnect becomes louder when things break down in real time, when mistakes go uncorrected, when adjustments come late, when opportunities slip through their fingers. That is when locker rooms start craving fresh direction. Not because they dislike the coach they have, but because the ceiling they once envisioned starts feeling out of reach. But here is the twist that makes this team fascinating. Even with all that tension, even with the inconsistencies, there is still a foundation strong enough to withstand the noise. Veterans like TJ know the value of accountability, structure, and culture. They know that organizations with steady leadership stay competitive longer than those that cycle through chaos every year. And that is why the situation is so complex. Because change might feel necessary in some areas, but stability still carries weight. That balance is what makes the future so unpredictable. But whether change happens or not, one thing is certain. This team's leaders are not going anywhere because of a shift in the coaching staff. They are competitors wired to adapt. They are professionals who have weathered storms far messier than speculation and rumor. And ultimately, their loyalty is to the mission of winning football games, not to a single voice on the sideline. But before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to Steelers Nation Central and hit the like button on this video. Your support helps us keep bringing you the latest updates on the Pittsburgh Steelers. And don't forget to share your thoughts on the news in the comments below. Cam Heyward stunned everyone in Pittsburgh after training today, igniting a storm of rumors that has rattled every corner of the Steelers facility. Reporters described a scene charged with tension as the veteran defensive anchor stormed off the field, delivering a furious outburst that echoed through the corridors like a warning siren. No one knows exactly what triggered the eruption, but those close to the situation insist this wasn't a simple moment of frustration. Some whisper it was the culmination of weeks of simmering dissatisfaction, a reaction to internal disagreements that have quietly grown into a full-blown crisis. Eyewitnesses claim Heyward's voice carried far beyond the cluster of stunned teammates, hinting at deeper issues brewing behind the scenes. There's speculation of unresolved conflict within the defensive unit, with unnamed sources suggesting that communication breakdowns and leadership clashes have been mounting. The The Steelers have long prided themselves on discipline and unity, yet the mood around the facility now feels strangely fragile, as if one spark could ignite something much larger. Fans outside the training grounds sensed that something unusual was unfolding. Social media exploded with theories, some insisting the team is facing a rift more serious than anyone predicted. Others argue Heyward's outburst is simply the reaction of a passionate leader refusing to accept complacency. Still, the tone around the city has shifted. Conversations in bars, locker rooms, and call-in shows revolve around the same question. Is this a temporary flare-up or the beginning of a deeper fracture inside the locker room? The Steelers remained silent, offering no official explanation. Heyward himself left without answering questions, his expression hardened, his body language stiff. That silence alone may be the most telling detail. Whatever is happening behind closed doors, Pittsburgh can feel the weight of it. The city is buzzing with nervous energy, waiting for clarity, hoping this is just noise, but fearing it might be the start of something far more turbulent. That's it for this update. If you enjoyed the video and want to keep receiving exclusive news about the Pittsburgh Steelers, make sure to subscribe to Steelers Nation Central and give this video a like. We always look forward to hearing your comments and opinions. See you in the next video.